December 26, 1996, 5:52 a.m. Patsy Ramsey dials 911, her voice frantic, desperate. Her 6-year-old daughter, JonBené, is missing. A ransom note sits on the staircase, but within hours, the ransom becomes irrelevant. Because JonBené isn't missing at all. She's in the basement, and she's already dead. What police would discover in that house wouldn't just shock a nation. It would create one of the most controversial unsolved murder cases in American history. And at the center of it all, a mother, a ransom note, and questions that have haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey, a case where evidence pointed in every direction, where theories collided with facts, and where a piece of paper became the most analyzed document in true crime history. Because that ransom note, written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, didn't just demand money. According to investigators and forensic linguists, it may have revealed far more than the author ever intended. Before we unlock the details of this investigation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at True Crime Vault, we dive deep into the cases that refuse to be forgotten, examining evidence, exploring theories, and respecting the victims who deserve justice. New investigations drop every week. If you're fascinated by unsolved cases like this one, smash that like button and drop a comment with your theory. Now, let's examine what really happened on that Christmas night in Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey family seemed to have it all. John Ramsey, a successful businessman worth millions, was the CEO of Access Graphics, a computer services company that had recently been named one of the fastest-growing companies in America. In 1996, the company grossed over $1 billion in revenue. Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen, Miss West Virginia, 1977, had traded pageant crowns for motherhood, but maintained that polished, perfectionist approach to life. And their children, Burke, age 9, and JonBené, age 6, seemed to embody the American dream. They lived in a sprawling 15-room Tudor-style mansion at 755 15th Street in one of Boulder's most affluent neighborhoods. The house was valued at approximately $700,000. To the outside world, they were the picture of success. But on December 26th, that picture shattered completely. The Christmas season of 1996 had been busy for the Ramseys. They'd attended multiple parties, decorated their home elaborately, and JonBené had participated in several holiday performances. She was a regular in child beauty pageants, competing in events where she wore makeup, elaborate costumes, and performed routines. This aspect of her life would later become a source of intense public scrutiny and criticism, with many questioning the appropriateness of putting young children in such adult-looking situations. But to the Ramseys, it was simply an activity JonBené enjoyed, a way for her to perform and shine. On December 25th, Christmas Day, the family followed their typical holiday routine. They opened presents in the morning. JonBené received a bicycle, her favorite gift. The family spent time together at home, then prepared for a party that evening at the home of Fleet and Priscilla White, close friends of the Ramseys. Fleet White was a successful businessman who had recently moved to Boulder. The two families had become close, and their children played together regularly. The party was a relaxed affair, with several families gathering to celebrate the holiday. JonBené played with other children. She ate some crab at the party, which would later be found in her digestive system during autopsy. The Ramseys stayed until approximately 9 or 9:30 p.m. According to both John and Patsy's accounts, JonBené fell asleep in the car on the drive home. This wasn't unusual. She was only 6 years old and it had been a long, exciting day. John carried her from the car into the house, bringing her upstairs to her bedroom. He stated that he put her directly into bed without changing her clothes. She was still wearing the black velvet pants and red turtleneck she'd worn to the party. Patsy said she checked on both children before going to bed herself. Burke was in his room, already asleep or getting ready for sleep. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, unremarkable. The family had an early morning ahead. They planned to fly on John's private plane to Charlevoix, Michigan, at 7 a.m. to spend the second part of the holidays with John's older children from his first marriage. Patsy stated she went to bed around 10 p.m. She laid out clothes for the next morning, both for herself and for JonBené. She set out a red turtleneck for JonBené and black pants, an outfit for the trip. John said he read for a while before going to sleep, possibly falling asleep around 10:30 or 11 p.m. The house grew quiet. Boulder, Colorado. On that winter night was cold, temperatures in the low 20s. Snow covered the ground. The Ramsey house, decorated with Christmas lights and a wreath on the door, looked peaceful from the outside. Inside, the family slept. Or at least that's what the official account stated. At approximately 5:45 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy Ramsey came down the spiral staircase from the second floor to the first floor. She was dressed in the same outfit she'd worn the night before, black velvet pants and a red jacket, which would later become a point of scrutiny. Why was she wearing the same clothes if she'd gone to bed and gotten up in the morning? Patsy explained she'd simply put the same clothes back on. Halfway down the staircase, she discovered 3 pieces of paper laid out on one of the steps. She picked them up and began reading. It was a ransom note. Her daughter had been kidnapped. At 5:52 a.m., Patsy called 911. The call was recorded, and every second of it has been analyzed thousands of times by investigators, audio experts, linguists, and amateur sleuths. Patsy's voice on the call sounded frantic, high-pitched, panicked. "We have a kidnapping," she told the dispatcher. "Hurry, please." The dispatcher, Kim Archuleta, tried to keep Patsy calm and get information. Patsy explained about the ransom note, that it said JonBené had been kidnapped. The dispatcher asked if Patsy had read the note, and Patsy confirmed she had. The call lasted 5 minutes and 55 seconds. At the end of the call, there's a moment where it sounds like Patsy may not have fully disconnected the line before setting the phone down. Audio experts later enhanced this section and claimed to hear 3 voices. One sounds like Patsy, no longer using the frantic voice from the call, saying something like, "Help me, Jesus." Another sounds like John, possibly saying, "We're not speaking to you." And a third, higher-pitched voice, possibly Burke, saying, "What did you find?" This enhanced audio became controversial because the Ramseys stated Burke was asleep during this time and didn't wake up until later. The audio quality is poor, and interpretations vary wildly. But if Burke was awake and present, it contradicts the Ramsey account. If the voices aren't what experts claim, it's irrelevant. The debate over this brief audio clip continues. Officers Rick French and Carl Veitch arrived at the Ramsey residence at 5:56 a.m., just 4 minutes after the 911 call. Response time was excellent. They found Patsy in the hallway near the kitchen, visibly distraught, crying. John Ramsey met them at the door, let them in, and immediately showed them the ransom note. Officer French picked it up and read it. Immediately, even to a patrol officer with no specialized training in kidnapping cases, the note seemed odd. It was long, extremely long for a ransom note. Most ransom demands are brief, direct, businesslike. This one rambled. It included strange phrases, apparent movie references, and specific details about the Ramsey family that seemed incongruous with a kidnapping by a foreign faction. The note began, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter." The note went on to demand $118,000 in cash, specifying $20 bills and $100 bills in a brown paper bag. It warned John not to contact police, stating, "Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded." The threat was graphic and violent. The note continued with increasingly bizarre language, telling John, "You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. The money will be in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier pickup of your daughter." It referenced John's business, Access Graphics, and said, "You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John." The note ended with Victory SBTC. The letters SBTC have never been definitively explained, despite countless theories ranging from acronyms to religious references to military terms. Officer French asked John if he'd checked the house. John said he'd looked in JonBenét's room but hadn't searched thoroughly. French began a protective sweep of the residence. The house was massive, over 7,000 square feet, with multiple levels including a basement. French checked doors and windows on the first and second floors. He found no obvious signs of forced entry. A door leading from the butler's kitchen to the outside patio was unlocked, but John explained they sometimes left it that way. French went down to the basement, a sprawling area with multiple rooms, storage spaces, and utilities. He checked several rooms. He came to a white door that was closed and latched on the outside with a wooden block. He opened it slightly, looked in with his flashlight, saw it appeared to be a storage room, saw no windows, and determined no one could have exited through that room. He closed the door and continued his search. That room was the wine cellar. JonBenét's body was already inside, covered with a white blanket, just a few feet from where Officer French stood. But in the darkness, with just a flashlight, looking for exit points rather than conducting a full search, he missed her. This failure to fully search the basement would later be identified as one of the crucial mistakes in the initial response. French completed his sweep and reported back that the house seemed secure, but there were several possible entry points. A window in the basement had a broken pane. John Ramsey later explained that he himself had broken that window several months earlier, when he'd been locked out of the house and needed to get inside. He'd climbed through the window well and through that window to access the basement. He admitted he'd never had it repaired. The window well outside the broken window had a metal grate covering it, but the grate wasn't secured and could be moved. However, there were spider webs in the window well and covering parts of the window opening. An officer later noted that these webs appeared undisturbed, suggesting no one had climbed through recently. But spider webs are fragile, and their evidentiary value is debatable. A careful person could potentially navigate around them, or spiders could have rebuilt them quickly, or the webs proved no one had entered that way. The broken window would remain a point of contention between those arguing for an intruder and those arguing against one. By 6 a.m., more officers had arrived. Detective Linda Arndt, a detective with the Boulder Police Department, was called to the scene. The house began filling with people, which from an investigative standpoint was a disaster. John Ramsey had called his pilot to tell him they wouldn't be flying that morning. Patsy called their friends, Fleet and Priscilla White, and John and Barbara Fernie. These friends arrived at the house within approximately an hour. The Reverend Roll Hoverstock, the Ramsey family pastor, also came to the house. The family's personal physician, Dr. Francesco Buff, arrived and administered sedatives to Patsy, who was distraught. At one point, there were over a dozen people in the house. People moved from room to room. They hugged Patsy and John. They touched surfaces. They used bathrooms. From a crime scene perspective, the contamination was catastrophic. But at that moment, everyone believed this was a kidnapping. The focus was on supporting the family and waiting for the ransom call. Detective Arndt tried to manage the scene. She was essentially alone as the only detective present for several hours, as other detectives were tied up with other calls or took time to arrive. She attempted to secure the ransom money. John Ramsey went to the bank as soon as it opened and withdrew $118,000 in the denomination specified in the ransom note. He brought the money back in a paper bag and set it on a table, ready for the exchange. Everyone waited. The note said the call would come between 8 and 10 a.m. 8 o'clock came and went. No call. 9 o'clock passed. Still nothing. 10 o'clock, the deadline mentioned in the note, arrived. The phone didn't ring. The kidnappers never called. This was highly unusual. In genuine kidnapping cases, kidnappers make contact to arrange the ransom exchange. That's the entire point. Here, nothing. As the morning stretched toward afternoon, Detective Arndt became increasingly uncomfortable. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Around 11 a.m., Detective Arndt spoke with her superiors and others in the department. More detectives were supposed to be coming to the scene, but there was confusion about assignments and availability. Arndt was feeling overwhelmed. At some point after 1 p.m., Arndt made a decision that would forever change the case. She asked Fleet White and John Ramsey to conduct another search of the house from top to bottom, looking for anything unusual, anything out of place, anything that might provide a clue about what had happened to JonBenét. This instruction violated crime scene protocols. Civilians should never be asked to search a potential crime scene. But Arndt later explained she felt something was very wrong, and she wanted any potential evidence found before the scene got even more contaminated. John Ramsey and Fleet White started on the upper floor and worked their way down. They checked Burke's room, JonBenét's room, the master bedroom, bathrooms, guest rooms. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed. They moved to the first floor, checking the living room, dining room, study, kitchen. Again, nothing remarkable. Then they went to the basement. John headed directly for the wine cellar, the small room with the white door that Officer French had opened briefly that morning. John later stated he'd checked that room earlier around 10 a.m., according to some accounts, though this timeline is disputed. Now, at approximately 1 p.m., John opened the door again. Fleet White was right behind him. The room was dark. John turned on the light switch. And there, on the floor, he saw his daughter. John Ramsey's reaction was immediate. He screamed, "Oh my God, oh my God." He rushed into the room. JonBené was lying on her back on the concrete floor, covered with a white blanket. John pulled the blanket off. She was wearing a white knit shirt that was pulled up slightly, and white long underwear with a snowflake pattern. Her arms were extended above her head, wrists bound together with white cord. A cord was embedded in her neck, tied so tightly it had created a deep furrow in her skin. There was a wooden stick, later identified as part of a paintbrush, tied into the cord, creating what's known as a garrote. Duct tape covered her mouth. John immediately pulled the duct tape off her mouth. He picked up his daughter's body. She was stiff, cold, in full rigor mortis. Her skin was pale, lips blue. She was clearly dead and had been for hours. But John, a father confronted with his murdered child, didn't process that rationally. He carried her upstairs. Fleet White, witnessing this scene, was frozen. He later described being in shock, unable to fully process what was happening. He followed John up from the basement. John emerged into the hallway carrying JonBené. Detective Arndt saw him. She later testified that when John brought JonBené up, she immediately knew the situation had changed completely. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was a homicide. And the crime scene was now catastrophically compromised. John had moved the body. He'd removed the duct tape. He'd touched evidence. The blanket that had covered JonBené was disturbed. The original position of the body was altered. From a forensic standpoint, crucial information was lost in that moment. John carried JonBené to the living room and laid her on the floor near the Christmas tree. Patsy, seeing her daughter, threw herself onto the body, screaming, wailing. Friends rushed in. People were crying, praying. It was chaos. Detective Arndt attempted to regain control. She tried to keep people back. She covered JonBené's body with a blanket and a Colorado Avalanche sweatshirt that was nearby. She was alone, outnumbered, in a house full of people, with a murdered child and no backup immediately available. She later described feeling that she was in potential danger, uncertain what had happened or who was responsible. She counted her bullets, a detail she later shared in interviews, explaining she felt that vulnerable and concerned. The coroner was called. The house was secured as a crime scene, though far too late. The Ramseys and their friends were moved to a separate location. The Boulder Police Department's homicide unit responded in force. Crime scene technicians began processing the house. Photographers documented everything. Evidence was collected, but the damage was done. The crime scene had been contaminated by over a dozen people walking through it for 7 hours before the body was even found. Evidence had been touched, moved, or destroyed. The investigation was starting under the worst possible circumstances. The body was transported to the Boulder County Coroner's Office. Dr. John Meyer, the Boulder County Coroner, performed the autopsy on December 27th, beginning at 8:15 a.m. What he documented was heartbreaking and horrifying. JonBené Patricia Ramsey, age 6, Caucasian female, was 45 inches tall and weighed 45 pounds. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. External examination revealed duct tape residue around her mouth area, though the actual tape had been removed by her father. There were areas of dried blood around her nose and mouth. Her hands had been tied above her head with a white cord, though the binding was loose enough that it may have been staging rather than functional restraint. The same type of white cord was embedded deeply into the skin of her neck, forming the garrote that had strangled her. The most shocking finding was the head injury. Dr. Meyer identified an 8.5-inch linear skull fracture on the right side of JonBené's head, extending from the right rear portion of the skull forward and toward the midline. The fracture had caused massive hemorrhaging and injury to the brain beneath. This was not a minor injury. This was catastrophic trauma, the kind caused by tremendous force. An adult striking a child's head with a hard object like a baseball bat, a flashlight, or a heavy tool could cause this injury, or a fall from significant height onto a hard surface. The force required was substantial. Dr. Meyer estimated the blow would have rendered JonBenet immediately unconscious. The critical question became which injury came first, the head blow or the strangulation. This timing matters enormously for understanding what happened. Dr. Meyer's opinion was that the head injury came first, rendering JonBenet unconscious, but not immediately killing her. She remained alive but comatose. Then, at some point between 45 minutes to 2 hours later, based on forensic indicators, she was strangled with the cord garrote. The strangulation was the ultimate cause of death, cutting off oxygen to her brain and causing asphyxiation. But she was likely already unconscious from the head wound when strangled. This sequence suggests a possible scenario where an initial injury, whether intentional or accidental, was followed by a decision to strangle the child, either to ensure death or to stage a different type of crime. Dr. Meyer also noted petechial hemorrhages in JonBenet's eyes, tiny burst blood vessels consistent with asphyxiation. He found congestion and edema in her lungs. The furrow around her neck was deep and had caused significant soft tissue injury. The garrote itself was sophisticated in construction. A length of white nylon cord was tied around JonBenet's neck. The cord was then looped through a knot, and a broken piece of wooden paintbrush, approximately 4.5 inches long, was tied to the cord. This created a handle that allowed the perpetrator to twist the device, tightening the cord around the neck. This wasn't a simple strangulation with hands or even a ligature tied once. This was a constructed device made deliberately, requiring time and thought. The paintbrush came from Patsy Ramsey's art supply set in the basement. The broken paintbrush pieces were found in the basement. The middle section, approximately 4.5 inches used in the garrote, was around JonBenet's neck. But the end piece of the paintbrush, approximately 2.5 inches, was never found and remains missing to this day. The autopsy also revealed evidence of vaginal injury. Dr. Meyer documented abrasions and a small amount of bleeding in the vaginal area. This finding ignited fierce debate among experts. Dr. Meyer himself noted the injuries but didn't make a definitive conclusion about when they occurred or what caused them. Some experts who later reviewed the autopsy materials concluded the injuries indicated sexual assault on the night of the murder. Dr. Cyril Vecht, a famous forensic pathologist, stated he believed there was evidence of sexual assault that night. However, other experts disagreed. Some suggested the injuries could have resulted from chronic abuse over time rather than acute assault that night. Still others proposed the injuries could be post-mortem, caused by staging or manipulation of the body after death. And some argued the injuries were consistent with irritation from improper wiping or other innocent causes. A medical panel was convened by the Boulder District Attorney's Office to review the evidence. The panel's conclusion was that the evidence didn't clearly support acute sexual assault on the night of the murder, but some panel members noted evidence of possible prior vaginal trauma. The disagreement among medical experts left this question unresolved. But the possibility of sexual assault, either that night or previously, became a major component of various theories about the case. The stomach contents provided another critical clue. Dr. Meyer identified partially digested pineapple in JonBenet's small intestine. He also found pineapple in her duodenum. Based on digestion rates, he estimated she had eaten the pineapple approximately 2 hours before death, though this timing can vary. Additionally, he found digested material consistent with the crab she had eaten at the White's party earlier in the evening. The pineapple finding was significant because the Ramseys stated that JonBenet had gone directly to bed when they returned home from the party and didn't eat anything. Yet here was clear evidence she had eaten fresh pineapple within roughly 2 hours of her death, placing that meal somewhere between 10 p.m. and midnight if she died around midnight to 2 a.m. In the Ramsey kitchen, on the breakfast table, investigators found a white bowl containing pineapple chunks in liquid, with a large serving spoon in the bowl. The bowl had fingerprints on it. Analysis identified Burke Ramsey's fingerprints and Patsy Ramsey's fingerprints on the bowl. This physical evidence contradicted the family's account and suggested JonBenet was awake and eating after returning home, and that Burke and Patsy had some involvement with that bowl of pineapple. When asked about it in interviews, Burke stated he didn't remember eating pineapple that night. Patsy stated she didn't prepare pineapple and didn't remember the bowl. The pineapple became one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the case. The time of death was estimated between midnight and 6 a.m. on December 26th, with the most likely window being midnight to 2 a.m. based on rigor mortis, liver mortis, and stomach contents. This meant JonBené died while her family was in the house, while they were supposedly asleep in their beds. Either an intruder was present in the house during those hours, or someone in the house was responsible. Those were the two fundamental possibilities. Every piece of evidence, every theory, ultimately pointed back to that binary choice. The crime scene in the basement wine cellar where JonBenét's body was found revealed additional details. The room was small, approximately 12 feet by 6 feet, with no windows. It was dark, requiring artificial light. The room was accessed through a hallway in the basement. To get there from the main part of the house, one would go down the stairs to the basement, pass through the boiler room, walk down a hallway past a bathroom and storage room, and then find the white door latched from the outside with a wooden peg. The room had been used for wine storage at some point, but wasn't actively used at the time of the murder. Inside, the floor was concrete. JonBenét's body had been found lying on this floor on her back, covered with a white blanket that police later determined came from the dryer in the basement. Her arms were extended above her head, wrists loosely tied with white cord in a manner that appeared more for show than actual restraint. Her mouth had been covered with duct tape. The garrote was around her neck. She was wearing a white knit shirt and white long underwear with a snowflake pattern. Notably, she was not wearing the black velvet pants and red turtleneck she'd worn to the party the night before. She'd been changed at some point. The long underwear she wore was size 12 to 14, much larger than her normal size 6. Patsy later explained she'd purchased these larger underwear as a future gift for JonBenét's older cousin but kept them at the house. Why JonBené was wearing them remains unclear. Some theorize the perpetrator changed her after the murder, grabbed whatever underwear was available, and didn't pay attention to size. The original underwear she'd been wearing was never found and is presumed to have been taken from the house by the perpetrator. Near JonBenét's body, investigators found a pink nightgown, one JonBené frequently wore. It was balled up near her body, and forensic testing found no obvious evidence of how it got there. Some theories suggested the perpetrator had tried to dress JonBenet in her nightgown to make it appear she'd been in bed, but gave up. The white blanket covering her body showed trace evidence that would become important. Fibers found on the blanket included fibers consistent with Patsy Ramsey's black and red jacket, the one she wore on Christmas night and the next morning. These fibers were also found on the duct tape covering JonBenét's mouth and in the paint tray in the basement where the broken paintbrush was found. The presence of these fibers in multiple locations related to the crime would become a major point of debate. Defenders of the Ramseys argued the fibers could have transferred innocently through secondary transfer, as Patsy wore that jacket frequently, and the items could have picked up fibers through normal contact. Critics argued the fibers' presence in so many crime-related locations suggested Patsy's direct involvement in the murder or staging. The duct tape on JonBenét's mouth was sent for analysis. It was standard duct tape, a very common brand, but police could not find the roll of duct tape in the Ramsey home that this piece came from. The tape had been cut, not torn, suggesting scissors or a knife was used. The Ramseys stated they didn't normally keep duct tape in the house and didn't know where this tape came from. This suggested the perpetrator brought it with them or obtained it from somewhere in the house that wasn't obvious. The same was true for the white nylon cord. Police could not locate the source of this cord in the Ramsey home. The Ramseys denied recognizing it. This fact supports an intruder theory because it suggests someone brought materials to the scene. However, critics noted the Ramsey house had numerous storage areas, a 3-car garage, and outdoor sheds, and it's entirely possible the cord and tape were somewhere on the property that police never found, or the Ramseys simply didn't remember. The ransom note, 3 pages written on a white legal pad, became the most analyzed document in the case. The pad itself was found in the Ramsey home, in the kitchen area where Patsy kept notepads for writing lists and notes. The pen used to write the note was a black Sharpie felt-tip pen, also from the Ramsey home, found in a pen cup on the kitchen counter. Whoever wrote the note had taken the time to find a pad, find a pen, and then compose the note. A practice note was also discovered in the pad. On one page, someone had started writing Mr. and Mrs. R, and then stopped, evidently deciding against addressing the note to both John and Patsy. The note was then addressed only to John. Mr. Ramsey. This practice note indicated the writer wasn't certain how to start, tried one approach, rejected it, and started over. This suggests the writer was not in a rush and felt comfortable enough to make mistakes and revise. The content of the note was bizarre. As mentioned earlier, it was unusually long, rambling, and filled with strange phrases. Forensic linguists and investigators noted numerous oddities. The note used language that seemed like it came from action movies. "Listen carefully" is a common phrase in movie kidnapping scenes. "Hence" is an unusual word choice for criminals. "Attaché" is spelled with an accent, suggesting someone educated or pretentious. The note referenced John's business, Access Graphics, and his bonus amount precisely. It mentioned his Southern common sense, a detail someone close to him would know. The signature Victory SBTC has never been explained satisfactorily. Theories include religious references like Saved by the Cross, military terms, acronyms for organizations, or simply meaningless letters designed to mislead. The exclamation point after Victory seems theatrical. Handwriting analysis of the ransom note was conducted by multiple experts with varying conclusions. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation analyzed the note and could not eliminate Patsy Ramsey as the author. Multiple private experts hired by both the prosecution and defense examined the writing. Chet Ubowski, a CBI handwriting expert, stated there were similarities but not enough for a definitive match. Larry Ziegler, a forensic document examiner, concluded Patsy probably didn't write it. Leonard Specken, another examiner, thought she likely did write it. Gideon Epstein, yet another expert, stated with high confidence that Patsy wrote the note. The lack of consensus among experts illustrates the difficulty of handwriting analysis. People can disguise their handwriting. The note could have been written with the non-dominant hand to alter appearance. Or someone could have tried to imitate Patsy's writing to frame her. Or Patsy wrote it and tried to disguise it. Or someone else entirely wrote it whose handwriting happened to share some characteristics with Patsy's. Handwriting analysis is not an exact science, and expert opinions varied wildly. However, the fact that most experts could not definitively eliminate Patsy as the author kept suspicion focused on her. John Ramsey's handwriting was analyzed as well. Nearly every expert agreed John did not write the ransom note. His writing style, letter formations, and other characteristics were sufficiently different that he was ruled out as the author by consensus. Burke Ramsey, age 9 at the time, was also ruled out. His handwriting didn't match, and the vocabulary and complexity of the note were beyond what a 9-year-old would typically produce. This left Patsy as the person who couldn't be eliminated from the family, or alternatively, an unknown intruder who wrote the note. Linguistic analysis of the note provided additional insights. James Fitzgerald, a forensic linguist who worked on the Unabomber case, analyzed the ransom note and concluded with high confidence that Patsy Ramsey wrote it. He pointed to specific phrases, punctuation patterns, and linguistic quirks that matched known samples of Patsy's writing. For example, the use of exclamation points in unusual places, certain capitalization choices, and the overall tone and vocabulary. Fitzgerald noted the note's dramatic, theatrical quality, which he felt matched Patsy's personality and communication style. Other linguists disagreed, arguing that linguistic analysis is subjective and can be influenced by investigator bias. The debate continues with no definitive consensus. One particularly interesting aspect of the ransom note is the demand amount, $118,000. This matched John Ramsey's recent bonus from Access Graphics almost exactly. John had received a bonus in that amount just months before. This detail suggests the note writer knew specific financial information about the Ramsey family. How would an intruder know this? It wasn't public information. It wasn't something casually mentioned in conversation with strangers. It was intimate family financial knowledge. Defenders of the intruder theory have suggested a disgruntled employee of John's company could have known about the bonus. Records from Access Graphics might have been accessible to certain individuals, or someone close to the family could have mentioned it, but it remains a detail that points towards someone with inside knowledge. The behavior of the Ramsey family in the days following the murder raised questions and suspicions. Within hours of the body being found, the Ramseys lawyered up, hiring prominent criminal defense attorneys. Critics pointed to this as evidence of guilt. Why would innocent parents immediately hire defense lawyers instead of cooperating fully with police? The Ramseys responded that they were advised by friends to protect themselves, especially after it became clear police were looking at them as suspects. They felt they needed legal representation to avoid being railroaded. This is a legitimate concern, as parents of murdered children are often the first suspects and sometimes wrongly accused. However, the immediate involvement of attorneys did create a barrier between the family and investigators that complicated the investigation. The Ramseys didn't sit for formal interviews with police for several months. When they finally did agree to be interviewed, it was under specific conditions negotiated by their attorneys, including separate interviews on separate days with specific detectives. This level of control over the interview process frustrated investigators who felt they needed immediate, detailed, and unrestricted access to the parents to understand what happened. The Ramseys argued they were cooperating within reason, but protecting their rights. The delay and conditions created an adversarial relationship that would define the case. On December 27th, the day after the murder, the Ramseys left Boulder. They flew to Atlanta, Georgia, where Patsy's family lived and where the funeral would be held. JonBenét's funeral took place on December 31st, 1996, at St. James Episcopal Church in Marietta, Georgia. Approximately 200 people attended. JonBenét was buried at St. James Episcopal Cemetery. The funeral was private, but media coverage was extensive. Images of Patsy in black, grieving, crying, were broadcast nationally. John appeared stoic, struggling to maintain composure. Burke was kept largely out of the public eye. The funeral and burial were deeply painful for the family and their friends. But for the public and the media, the spectacle of a child beauty queen's funeral became part of the growing obsession with the case. After the funeral, the Ramseys did not immediately return to Boulder. They stayed in Atlanta, then moved to a home they owned in Charlevoix, Michigan. They did not return to live in the Boulder house where JonBenet was murdered. Eventually, they sold the house. Their physical absence from Boulder during the early investigation created additional complications for police trying to follow up on questions and evidence. In April 1997, John and Patsy Ramsey appeared on CNN in a nationally televised interview. They sat with their attorney and answered questions from an interviewer. They denied any involvement in JonBenét's death. They stated an intruder killed their daughter. They appeared emotional, with Patsy crying and John's voice breaking at times. They described the horror of that morning, finding the note, the police response, and discovering JonBenét's body. They addressed some of the questions swirling in media and public speculation. Why did Patsy call friends before police fully secured the scene? Patsy explained she was panicked and needed support. Why did they lawyer up immediately? John explained they were advised to protect themselves legally. The interview was watched by millions and did little to settle the debate. Some viewers saw grieving parents wrongly accused. Others saw a calculated performance by guilty parties. In May 1997, the Ramseys formally sat for interviews with Boulder police detectives. The interviews were conducted separately, on different days, at the Boulder County Justice Center. Detectives asked detailed questions about the night of December 25th, the morning of December 26th, their relationships, their family dynamics, and the evidence. The Ramseys answered questions but also declined to answer some areas their attorneys advised against. The interviews were lengthy, but investigators came away feeling they didn't get complete answers. Specific questions about the pineapple, the ransom note, the timeline, and physical evidence remained unresolved. The Ramseys maintained their innocence and their belief that an intruder was responsible. The Boulder Police Department's investigation expanded to examine potential suspects outside the family. One early suspect was a man named Bill McReynolds, who had played Santa Claus at a Ramsey Christmas party a few days before the murder. McReynolds was a retired journalism professor who enjoyed playing Santa for local families. He had visited the Ramsey home, met JonBenet, and given her a special gift. Some investigators found his close timing to the murder suspicious. Additionally, McReynolds' wife had written a play years earlier involving a scenario eerily similar to JonBenét's murder, where a young girl was killed in a basement. This coincidence seemed too strange to ignore. McReynolds was investigated thoroughly. He provided hair samples, handwriting samples, and submitted to interviews. He also provided alibis for the night of the murder. Ultimately, he was cleared by investigators who found no evidence linking him to the crime. McReynolds died in 2002, maintaining his innocence. But for a time, he was a serious suspect in the public mind. Another suspect was a man named John Mark Carr. In August 2006, almost 10 years after the murder, Carr, an American schoolteacher living in Thailand, contacted authorities and confessed to killing JonBené. He provided detailed statements about the crime, claiming he was with JonBené when she died, but that her death was an accident. He was arrested in Bangkok and extradited to the United States. Media frenzy erupted. Had the killer finally been caught? But as investigators interviewed Carr and examined his claims, problems emerged. His confession contained inaccuracies and details that didn't match the crime scene. More critically, his DNA was tested against the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. It wasn't a match. Carr was ruled out as the killer and released. It turned out he was a disturbed individual obsessed with the case who had confessed falsely. His bizarre involvement wasted investigative resources but reminded everyone that false confessions do occur, especially in high-profile cases. Numerous other individuals were investigated over the years. Convicted sex offenders in the Boulder area were looked at. Transients and drifters who might have been in the neighborhood on Christmas night were tracked down. A theory emerged about a couple who had attended a Christmas party tour of homes in the Ramsey neighborhood days before the murder. Could someone have used that opportunity to case the Ramsey house? Investigators pursued this lead but found no evidence. Another theory involved a former housekeeper or employee who might have had a grudge or inside knowledge. Again, leads were investigated but didn't pan out. The reality was that despite thousands of hours of investigation and countless tips, no solid evidence pointed to any specific intruder. The DNA evidence in the case deserves detailed examination because it's often cited by those defending the Ramseys as proof of an intruder. During the initial investigation, DNA was extracted from bloodstains on JonBenét's underwear. These stains contained a mixture of JonBenét's blood and DNA from an unknown male. The unknown male DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains DNA profiles of convicted offenders. No match was found. In 2008, new touch DNA technology allowed investigators to extract DNA from the waistband of the long underwear JonBené was wearing. This touch DNA, genetic material left by skin cells from handling fabric, revealed a male DNA profile. When compared to the DNA from the underwear, it matched. The same unknown male DNA was on both the underwear and the long underwear. This finding suggested the same person had handled both items of clothing. In July 2008, based on this DNA evidence, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey wrote a letter to John Ramsey officially exonerating the Ramsey family. Lacey stated that the DNA evidence from two separate items of clothing worn by JonBené pointed conclusively to an intruder. She apologized to the Ramseys for the years of suspicion they had endured. This exoneration was controversial. Many investigators, including some who worked the case from the beginning, disagreed with Lacey's conclusion. They argued the DNA evidence was not conclusive. Touch DNA is incredibly sensitive and can be transferred innocently. The underwear JonBené wore were brand new, taken from a package that had never been washed. They were size 12 to 14, bought by Patsy as a future gift and stored at the house. The DNA could have come from a worker at the manufacturing plant in Taiwan where the underwear were made, or from someone who handled the package during shipping or stocking in the store, or from someone who touched the underwear while they were stored in the Ramsey house before JonBené wore them that night. Similarly, the long underwear had also been recently purchased and might not have been washed. The same manufacturing and handling contamination possibilities applied. Without knowing the source of the DNA, it was impossible to say whether it belonged to a murderer or was innocently present. The DNA findings also revealed mixture issues. Some samples showed mixtures of multiple DNA sources, making interpretation complicated. Degraded DNA and low quantities of genetic material in some samples added to the difficulty. The bottom line is that the DNA evidence is ambiguous. It could point to an intruder, or it could be innocent transfer. Without identifying the source, it doesn't definitively prove anything. In 2016, when CBS aired a documentary suggesting Burke Ramsey was involved in his sister's death, Burke sued for defamation. During that lawsuit, experts testified about the DNA evidence. Some stated the DNA was likely from an intruder and was probative. Others testified it was more likely innocent contamination and not reliable evidence. The judge and jury in the defamation case were exposed to these competing viewpoints. illustrating the ongoing controversy. The grand jury process was another critical turning point. In September 1998, Boulder District Attorney Alex Hunter convened a grand jury to hear evidence in the JonBenét Ramsey case. Grand juries are secret proceedings where prosecutors present evidence and witnesses testify. The grand jury hears the case and decides whether sufficient probable cause exists to indict someone for a crime. The JonBenét grand jury met for over a year, hearing from dozens of witnesses, reviewing thousands of pages of documents, and examining all the physical evidence. The proceedings were highly secretive. Even the Ramseys didn't know what was being presented. On October 13, 1999, District Attorney Alex Hunter held a press conference. He announced that he would not be filing charges in the case. He stated that after careful consideration of the evidence, he did not believe there was sufficient evidence to prosecute beyond a reasonable doubt. He thanked the grand jury for their service and sent them home. The general public assumption was that the grand jury had declined to indict anyone, but that assumption was wrong. In 2013, the Boulder Daily Camera newspaper filed a lawsuit to obtain grand jury documents. After legal battles, a judge ordered the release of certain pages. What those pages revealed shocked many people. The grand jury had actually voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey. The indictment charged them not with murder directly, but with child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. The charges stated that the Ramseys did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenét Ramsey. The second count stated they did render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such person for the commission of a crime, knowing the person being assisted has committed and was suspected of the crime of murder in the first degree, and child abuse resulting in death. In plain language, the grand jury believed the Ramseys allowed their daughter to be placed in a dangerous situation that led to her death, and that they helped someone cover up the crime. The indictment was approved by the grand jury and ready to be signed, but Alex Hunter refused to sign it. As the district attorney, he had the authority to decline to prosecute even if the grand jury voted to indict. Hunter explained in subsequent statements that he believed the evidence was insufficient to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. He felt that without stronger evidence, a jury wouldn't convict, and pursuing charges would be unjust. This decision was and remains highly controversial. Critics accused Hunter of protecting the wealthy, well-connected Ramsey family. Supporters argued he was being responsible and realistic about the evidence. The indictment remained sealed for years, and the public didn't learn about it until 2013. The revelation that the grand jury voted to indict raised a crucial question. Who did the grand jury think the Ramseys were covering for? The charges were for accessory to a crime and allowing a child to be in danger, not for directly killing JonBenét. This suggested the grand jury believed someone else in the house killed JonBenét, and John and Patsy covered it up. The most obvious interpretation is that the grand jury suspected Burke, the 9-year-old son, was involved in JonBenét's death, and his parents staged a cover-up to protect him. Burke was 9 years old at the time, below the age of criminal responsibility in Colorado. Even if he had killed his sister, he couldn't be prosecuted. But his parents could be charged with covering up the crime and endangering their daughter. This theory gained traction among some investigators and the public. The theory involving Burke suggests a scenario something like this. JonBenét came downstairs late Christmas night, perhaps drawn by Burke eating the bowl of pineapple. She ate some pineapple. Burke and JonBenét got into a conflict, possibly over the pineapple, over toys, or over something else. Burke, in a moment of anger, struck JonBenét over the head with a heavy object, perhaps a flashlight found in the kitchen. The blow was catastrophic, rendering her unconscious. Burke, scared, told his parents. John and Patsy, finding JonBenét unconscious or near death, panicked, rather than calling 911 immediately, which would have revealed what Burke did and potentially destroyed their family. They made a terrible decision. They decided to stage a kidnapping and murder by an intruder to protect Burke. Over the next hour or two, they strangled JonBenét with the garrote to ensure death and make it look like a violent intruder crime. They redressed her in different underwear. They wrote the ransom note. They placed her body in the basement wine cellar. They wiped down evidence. and then Patsy called 911 in the morning pretending to discover the kidnapping. This theory explains several pieces of evidence. It explains the pineapple and Burke's fingerprints on the bowl. It explains why the ransom note was written on paper from the house with such intimate knowledge. It explains the staging elements that seemed amateurish and illogical. It explains why the Ramseys immediately lawyered up and controlled their interactions with police. It explains the grand jury's decision to indict for accessory and child endangerment rather than murder. But it also requires believing that parents would strangle their unconscious or dying daughter rather than call for help. It requires believing they could write a calm, detailed ransom note while their daughter lay dying. It requires believing they could maintain this secret for decades, lying to police, to media, to friends, to family, and never cracking under the immense pressure and scrutiny. And it ignores the DNA evidence entirely or requires explaining it away as contamination. Burke Ramsey has always denied involvement. He was interviewed by detectives shortly after the murder and stated he slept through the entire night and didn't know anything. In 2016, he appeared on the Dr. Phil show for a 3-part interview, his first major public interview. He appeared awkward, smiling at inappropriate times, and giving odd answers to some questions. Critics pointed to his demeanor as suspicious. Defenders argued he was simply an introverted person uncomfortable with interviews, and that his awkwardness meant nothing. Burke stated unequivocally that he didn't kill his sister, didn't know who did, and believed an intruder was responsible. When asked about the pineapple, he said he didn't remember eating it or giving it to JonBenet. When shown the photo of the bowl, he claimed not to recognize it. These non-answers frustrated viewers who felt he was being evasive. In September 2016, CBS aired a documentary titled The Case of JonBenét Ramsey. The documentary featured a team of experts, including investigators, forensic specialists, and behavioral analysts, who re-examined the evidence. Their conclusion was that Burke most likely killed JonBenet accidentally or intentionally, and the parents covered it up. They conducted experiments showing that a 9-year-old child could inflict the head injury found on JonBenet's skull using a flashlight. They analyzed the ransom note and behavioral evidence. The documentary presented their theory as the most likely explanation. Burke Ramsey filed a $750 million defamation lawsuit against CBS, the production company, and the experts involved. The lawsuit claimed the documentary falsely accused him of murder and destroyed his reputation. In January 2019, the lawsuit was settled for an undisclosed amount. The terms of the settlement were confidential, so it's unknown what CBS paid, if anything, or what conditions were agreed to. But the lawsuit and settlement highlighted the ongoing legal and reputational battles surrounding the case. Patsy Ramsey's behavior and statements have been scrutinized endlessly. Her 911 call has been analyzed for authenticity. Is her panic real or performed? Opinions vary. Her interviews with media and police have been dissected. Some observers find her emotional displays genuine. Others see them as manipulative. In one infamous moment during a CNN interview, Patsy was asked if she killed JonBenet. She responded, "Let me assure you that I did not kill JonBenet. I love that child with my whole of my heart and soul." Her delivery was theatrical, and critics felt it sounded rehearsed. Defenders argued she was simply a Southern woman who spoke dramatically and emotionally, and her statement was heartfelt. Patsy's background as a beauty queen added to public perception. She was used to performing, to presenting a polished image. Did that make her guilty of murder? Of course not, but it made people question whether they were seeing the real Patsy or a performance. One particular moment that drew intense scrutiny was Patsy's reaction to being shown the ransom note during an interview. She was asked to look at the note and comment on it. Her response was emotional, but some observers felt she avoided looking at it closely, as if she couldn't bear to face something she herself had written. Others thought she was simply overwhelmed by the reminder of that terrible morning. Handwriting experts asked Patsy to provide multiple samples of her writing for analysis. She complied, providing numerous examples, but some experts noted that her writing style seemed to change after the murder, becoming more deliberate and different from her natural pre-murder style. This could indicate she was consciously altering her writing to avoid matching the ransom note, or it could simply be the stress and trauma affecting her motor skills and handwriting. There's no way to know for certain. Patsy Ramsey was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 1993, 3 years before JonBenet's murder. She underwent treatment and went into remission. The cancer returned in 2002. She battled it for 4 more years. On June 24, 2006, at the age of 49, Patsy Ramsey died at her father's home in Roswell, Georgia. She never confessed to involvement in JonBenét's death. She never wavered from her statement that an intruder killed her daughter. In her final years, she continued advocating for justice and for finding the real killer. Her death meant that one of the 2 people who could definitively answer what happened that night was gone forever. If Patsy was innocent, she died without seeing justice for her daughter. If she was guilty, she took the secret to her grave. Jon Ramsey has outlived his wife and his daughter. He remarried in 2011 to fashion designer Jan Rousseau. He has continued to speak publicly about the case, giving interviews, appearing in documentaries, and advocating for advanced DNA testing. In recent years, Jon has pushed for the use of genealogical DNA techniques, the same method that identified the Golden State Killer, to trace the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. He believes this technology could finally identify the intruder who killed his daughter. Critics argue that Jon is chasing a dead end, that the DNA is not from the killer, but from innocent contamination. Jon remains firm in his belief that his family is innocent and that an intruder is responsible. The Boulder Police Department officially still considers the case unsolved. It remains an open homicide investigation. Over the years, the department has announced periodic updates, usually involving new DNA testing or re-examination of evidence. In December 2021, the Boulder Police Department issued a statement on the 25th anniversary of JonBenét's murder, stating they remain committed to solving the case and are working with state and federal partners on DNA analysis. In December 2022, the department announced they were using the latest DNA technology and working with the Colorado Cold Case Review Team. As of 2024, no arrests have been made and the case remains unsolved. The case has had a lasting cultural impact. JonBenét's face, particularly images of her in full pageant makeup and costumes, became iconic. Her murder sparked a national conversation about child beauty pageants and whether it's appropriate to dress young children in adult-styled clothing and makeup. Many critics argued the pageants sexualized children and potentially attracted predators. Defenders of pageants argued they were harmless fun and talent showcases. Regardless of one's view, the death of JonBenet put child pageants under intense scrutiny. Some parents withdrew their children from competitions. Some pageant organizations changed their rules regarding makeup and costume appropriateness. The debate continues to this day. The media coverage of the JonBenet case was unprecedented in the late 1990s. Before social media and true crime podcasts, cable news networks provided 24-hour coverage of major cases. The Ramsey case was perfect for this format. A beautiful child, wealthy parents, a murder mystery, salacious details, and no resolution. Networks devoted countless hours to discussing every detail, every theory, every interview. Pundits and guests debated guilt and innocence. The Ramseys were tried in the court of public opinion over and over. This media frenzy created an environment where facts and speculation blurred together. Viewers heard so many theories and watched so many reenactments that distinguishing between verified evidence and conjecture became difficult. The case also highlighted the danger of media narratives. Once the public believed the Ramseys were guilty, that belief became entrenched, even as evidence proved ambiguous. The family's wealth and celebrity status made them easy targets for cynicism. Wealthy people must be hiding something. Pageant mothers must be stage moms willing to do anything. These narratives, whether fair or not, shaped public opinion. In the decades since JonBenét's death, numerous books, documentaries, television specials, and podcasts have examined the case. Each offers a different perspective or theory. Some present the Ramseys as innocent victims of injustice. Others argue they clearly committed the crime. Still others explore the intruder theory or alternative suspects. The sheer volume of content created about this case speaks to its enduring fascination. Why does this case, out of thousands of child murders in America, remain so prominent in the public consciousness? Part of it is the mystery. The lack of resolution leaves people unsatisfied, wanting answers. Part of it is the cast of characters: a beauty queen mother, a millionaire father, a child pageant star. Part of it is the evidence that seems to point in every direction, and part of it is simply timing. The case emerged at the perfect moment in media history when 24-hour news networks needed content and the internet was beginning to allow armchair detectives to share theories and information widely. The impact on the Ramsey family has been profound and lasting. John Ramsey lost his daughter and his wife. His son Burke grew up under the shadow of suspicion. John's older children from his first marriage, John Andrew and Melinda, also faced scrutiny and had to defend their family publicly. The family was torn apart by tragedy and then relentlessly pursued by media and public speculation. If they are innocent, as they maintain, the injustice is staggering. An intruder murdered their daughter, and instead of receiving sympathy and support, they were accused, vilified, and investigated as suspects for decades. Their grief was compounded by suspicion. If they are guilty, then they successfully evaded justice through wealth, legal representation, and perhaps failures in the investigation. Either way, the family's life was irrevocably changed. JonBenét's grave in Georgia has become a site visited by the curious, the mournful, and true crime enthusiasts. Her headstone is small and simple. Fresh flowers are often left by strangers who never knew her, but feel connected to her story. It's a reminder that beneath all the theories and media coverage was a real 6-year-old girl who loved to sing and dance, who had friends and family, who had her whole life ahead of her. She should be 33 years old now, living a life we can only imagine. Instead, she's frozen in time, forever 6. Forever the little girl in the pageant dress on magazine covers and news reports. The failures in the investigation are worth examining because they offer lessons for law enforcement. The Boulder Police Department was a small department with limited experience in homicide investigations. When confronted with this high-profile murder, they were overwhelmed. The crime scene was not properly secured from the beginning. Too many people walked through the house. Evidence was contaminated or mishandled. The body was moved before proper forensic examination. Communication between the police department and the district attorney's office broke down, creating an adversarial relationship that hindered the investigation. Detectives became emotionally invested in particular theories and may have suffered from confirmation bias, seeing evidence that fit their theory while dismissing evidence that didn't. The department also faced intense media pressure and public scrutiny, which affected decision-making. The case became a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles about the importance of crime scene management, interagency cooperation, and evidence preservation. The ransom note deserves one final deep analysis because it truly is the centerpiece of the case. If we accept that the note was written by someone in the house, likely Patsy, then the purpose becomes clear. The note was meant to explain JonBenét's absence, to provide a reason why she wasn't in her bed, and to misdirect police away from searching the house thoroughly. The note set up a kidnapping scenario that would keep everyone focused on waiting for the ransom call and preparing the money rather than searching every corner of the house. If the body hadn't been found until later, perhaps when police conducted a more thorough search hours or days later, the crime scene would be even more contaminated and evidence more degraded. The note also provided an alternative narrative: a foreign faction, kidnappers, dangerous criminals who killed JonBenet. This narrative diverted attention from the family. If the note was written by Patsy in a panicked state after her daughter's death, it explains the length and oddness. She was trying to make it convincing, trying to include enough detail to seem real, but in doing so created something that was actually too detailed and too strange to be believable. The practice starred on the pad suggests someone who was uncertain, who was making this up as they went along. The use of movie phrases suggests someone drawing on fictional scenarios because they had no real experience with kidnappings. The demand for John's exact bonus amount was a mistake, revealing too much insider knowledge. The whole note, viewed through this lens, becomes understandable as a desperate staging attempt rather than a genuine ransom demand. If we accept the intruder theory, the ransom note becomes almost inexplicable. Why would an intruder spend so much time in the house writing a long note when they'd already killed their victim? What purpose did the note serve? If the goal was kidnapping and ransom, why kill JonBenet before even attempting to take her out of the house? If the goal was murder, why write a note at all? The intruder theory requires believing someone broke into the house, spent hours there, killed a child, constructed an elaborate garrote, wrote a multi-page ransom note, and left without being detected and without leaving clear evidence of entry. It's not impossible, but it requires accepting a lot of improbable actions and coincidences. The DNA evidence remains the strongest argument for an intruder. But DNA evidence requires context. The fact that unknown male DNA was found on JonBenét's clothing is significant, but it's not proof of an intruder's presence during the murder. It could be manufacturing contamination, as mentioned earlier. It could be from someone who touched the clothing at any point before JonBenét wore it. It could even be from a police officer or investigator who touched the evidence during collection or processing, though protocols are designed to prevent that. Without identifying the source of the DNA, it's an open question. If the DNA is ever matched to a specific individual with no innocent explanation for how their DNA got on JonBenét's clothing, that would be a game changer. Until then, it remains a piece of the puzzle that doesn't clearly fit into either the intruder theory or the family theory. The possibility that this case will ever be truly solved seems remote. Nearly 30 years have passed. Key witnesses have died. Evidence has degraded. Memories have faded. The massive publicity means potential jurors have been exposed to endless theories and opinions, making a fair trial almost impossible. Even if DNA evidence pointed to a specific individual, building a prosecutable case after this much time would be extraordinarily difficult. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder, so technically the case could be prosecuted at any time. But practical and legal obstacles abound. The most likely scenario is that the case remains officially unsolved forever, a permanent mystery that continues to generate speculation but never receives a definitive answer. What we're left with is a tragedy without resolution. A 6-year-old girl was murdered in her own home on Christmas night. Someone struck her head with tremendous force and then strangled her with a garrote. Someone staged a bizarre kidnapping scenario with a ransom note that made little sense. And someone has never been held accountable. Whether that someone was a mysterious intruder who came and went like a ghost, or someone in the family who committed an unspeakable act and covered it up, we may never know with certainty. The evidence can be interpreted to support multiple theories. Experts disagree. Investigations have reached dead ends, and the truth, whatever it is, remains elusive. If this deep dive into one of America's most famous unsolved cases has left you thinking, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vault. We don't just scratch the surface. We examine every detail, every piece of evidence, every theory, with respect for the victims and a commitment to facts. Hit that like button if you appreciate this thorough analysis, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. After hearing all the evidence, what do you believe happened to JonBenét Ramsey? Do you think an intruder was responsible? Do you believe someone in the family was involved? What's your take on the ransom note? What about the DNA evidence? Share your theory respectfully in the comments. And remember, this isn't just a puzzle to solve or a mystery to debate. This was a real little girl whose life was violently taken from her. JonBenét Ramsey deserves justice. Her family deserves answers. And until that day comes, if it ever does, we'll continue to examine the evidence, explore the theories, and keep her memory alive. Thank you for watching True Crime Vault. Until the next investigation, stay curious, stay respectful, and never forget the victims behind the cases.